The envelope trembled in Fiona Carter's hands as she stared at the bank statement that confirmed the impossible. A single donation of $200,000 had just saved the Meadowbrook Animal Shelter from permanent closure. She had spent 3 sleepless nights calling every contact she had, begging for help, preparing herself for the heartbreak of finding homes for 63 dogs and cats before the building was seized. Now, sitting in her cramped office with peeling paint and a space heater that barely worked, she could hardly believe what she was reading. The donation had come through anonymously at first, but the bank had included a processing receipt with a name she had to squint to read: Theodore Nash. The letters were slightly smudged, but unmistakable. She grabbed her phone and typed the name into the search bar, her heart pounding as the results loaded. Theodore Nash, CEO of Nash Global Industries, one of the largest commercial real estate development companies in the country. His photo appeared first, a man who looked to be in his early 30s with dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to assess everything with quiet intensity. The articles described him as ruthless in business, brilliant in strategy, and virtually impossible to get a meeting with unless you were worth millions yourself. Fiona looked around her tiny office, at the stack of unpaid bills, at the photo wall covered with pictures of animals they had saved over the past 5 years. She thought of the volunteers who showed up every weekend, of the high school kids who came after class to walk the dogs, of Mrs. Patterson who baked treats for the staff every Monday. This shelter was not just a building. It was a lifeline for animals nobody else wanted, and a community that had rallied around them time and time again. Theodore Nash had saved them, and she needed to know why. More than that, she needed to thank him properly, not with an email or a formal letter, but face to face. She owed him that much. 2 days later, Fiona stood outside the towering glass building that housed Nash Global Industries in downtown Seattle. She had dressed in the only professional outfit she owned, a navy blazer and matching pants that she usually reserved for fundraising events, and she had rehearsed what she would say at least 100 times during the drive into the city. Her ancient Honda had barely made it up the hills, coughing and sputtering, but she had arrived with determination burning in her chest. The lobby was all marble and modern art, with a receptionist desk that looked like it cost more than her annual salary. She approached with her chin up, clutching a folder that contained photos of the shelter and a handwritten thank you card. "I'm here to see Theodore Nash," she said, trying to sound confident. The receptionist, a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes, glanced up from her computer. "Do you have an appointment?" "No, but I really need to speak with him. It's about a donation he made to the Meadowbrook Animal Shelter." The woman's expression shifted to something between pity and dismissal. "Mr. Nash doesn't take unscheduled meetings. If you would like to leave a message, I can pass it along to his assistant." Fiona felt her determination wavering but pushed forward anyway. "Please, I drove 2 hours to get here. I just need 5 minutes. He saved our shelter and I need to thank him personally." "I understand, but company policy is very strict. Mr. Nash has a full schedule today." Before Fiona could respond, the elevator doors across the lobby opened, and a group of men in expensive suits emerged, talking in low, serious tones. One of them stood slightly apart from the rest, and Fiona recognized him immediately from the photos. Theodore Nash was taller than she had expected, with broad shoulders and a presence that seemed to command attention without effort. He was listening to something one of the other men was saying, his expression unreadable. Without thinking, Fiona moved away from the desk and walked directly toward him. The receptionist called after her, but she ignored it, her focus entirely on the man who had given her shelter a second chance. "Mr. Nash," she called out, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous lobby. He stopped and turned, his dark eyes fixing on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. The other men paused as well, looking between Theodore and this woman who had just interrupted them. "My name is Fiona Carter. I run the Meadowbrook Animal Shelter, and you donated $200,000 to us. I needed to come here and thank you in person because what you did saved 63 animals and the people who care for them." There was a moment of silence that felt like it stretched forever. Security guards were already moving toward her, but Theodore raised a hand, stopping them. "How did you get my name?" he asked, his voice low and measured. "It was on the bank processing receipt. I know you probably wanted to remain anonymous, but I could not just send an email or a letter. You saved us, and I needed you to know what that means." Something flickered across his face, too quick for her to identify. He glanced at the men beside him and then back at Fiona. "Give me a moment," he said to his colleagues before gesturing toward a seating area near the windows. "Miss Carter, shall we talk?" Fiona followed him, her heart racing. Up close, Theodore Nash was even more imposing, but there was something in the way he moved, a careful control that suggested he was always thinking several steps ahead. They sat in modern leather chairs that were surprisingly comfortable, and Fiona opened her folder, pulling out the photos she had brought. "This is the shelter," she said, handing them to him one by one. "We have been operating for 5 years on donations and grants, but we lost our main funding source 3 months ago. I was 2 weeks away from having to shut down when your donation came through." Theodore looked at each photo carefully. There was one of a golden retriever named Max who had been found abandoned on the highway, another of a litter of kittens that had been rescued from a condemned building, and several of the volunteers working with the animals. "Why did you donate?" Fiona asked, unable to contain her curiosity. "I looked you up. You run a billion-dollar company. You probably get hundreds of requests for money every week. Why us?" He set the photos down and met her gaze. "I did not expect anyone to track me down. I'm persistent when it matters." A faint smile touched his lips, so brief she almost missed it. "My family had a dog when I was growing up. A German shepherd named Duke. He was my best friend from the time I was 7 until I was 20. When Duke got sick, my father wanted to put him down immediately, said it was not worth the expense to treat him. But my mother took him to a shelter that had a veterinary program, and they helped us. They gave Duke 3 more good years." Fiona felt a lump forming in her throat. "The shelter I went to close down years ago, but when I saw your request come across my desk, it reminded me of what they did for my family. So I made the donation. It came across your desk. You personally review charity requests." "I review everything that matters," Theodore said. "My assistant filters most of it, but she knows what gets my attention." "Well, I'm glad she does," Fiona said, feeling some of her nervousness ease, "because you gave us a chance to keep going. We have a 10-year-old boy who comes every Saturday to read to the cats because he's shy and they help him practice. We have a veteran who volunteers because taking care of the dogs helps with his PTSD. We're not just saving animals, Mr. Nash. We're helping people too." Theodore was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Call me Theodore, and I'm glad the money is being put to good use. Would you like to visit sometime?" The words came out before Fiona could stop them. "I mean, if you want to see where your donation went." "No pressure, I just thought you might like to meet some of the animals." He looked at her with those dark, assessing eyes, and Fiona felt her cheeks warm. She was probably pushing her luck, but something about Theodore Nash made her want to push. "I have a full schedule for the next 2 weeks," he said, and Fiona's heart sank. But I could make time 3 weeks from Saturday. Would that work? She nodded, trying not to smile too widely. That would be perfect. Thank you, Theodore, for everything. As she left the building and drove back toward Meadowbrook, Fiona could not shake the image of Theodore Nash from her mind. There was something about him, a loneliness hidden beneath the businessman exterior, that called to her. She told herself it was just gratitude, that she was reading too much into a simple conversation, but deep down, she knew it was something more. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of activity. Fiona threw herself into improving the shelter, using part of the donation to fix the leaking roof and upgrade the kennels. She hired a part-time veterinary assistant and restocked their medical supplies. Every time she made a decision about how to spend the money, she thought about Theodore and wondered if he would approve. She also thought about him late at night when the shelter was quiet, and she was alone with her thoughts. She replayed their conversation, analyzed every word, every look. It was ridiculous, really. He was a billionaire CEO, and she ran a barely functional animal shelter. They lived in completely different worlds. But then Saturday arrived, and Theodore Nash pulled up to the shelter in a black SUV that looked completely out of place among the dusty pickups and old sedans in the parking lot. Fiona watched from the window as he stepped out, dressed casually in jeans and a dark Henley that showed off his athletic build. Her mouth went dry. She met him at the door, suddenly very aware that she was wearing old jeans with a hole in the knee and a shelter t-shirt that had seen better days. "You came," she said, trying to sound casual. "I said I would. Come on, let me give you the tour." She led him through the facility, showing him the dog kennels first. The animals went crazy when they entered, barking and jumping, tails wagging frantically. Theodore's serious expression softened as he watched them. "Can I?" he asked, gesturing toward one of the kennels. "Of course." He knelt down in front of a kennel housing a German Shepherd mix named Scout. The dog immediately pressed against the gate, whining softly. Theodore reached through and scratched behind Scout's ears, and Fiona saw something in his expression shift, a vulnerability that had not been there before. "He looks like Duke," Theodore said quietly. "Want to take him out to the yard?" Theodore nodded, and Fiona opened the kennel. Scout bounded out and immediately attached himself to Theodore, leaning against his leg. They walked out to the fenced yard, and Fiona threw a tennis ball. Scout took off like a shot, and Theodore actually laughed, a genuine sound that made Fiona's heart skip. "He's a good dog," Theodore said as Scout returned with the ball, dropping it at his feet. "Why hasn't anyone adopted him? He's 6 years old and people usually want puppies. Plus, he needs an active owner who has space for him to run. He's been with us for 8 months. Theodore threw the ball again, watching Scout race after it. "That's too long." They spent the next hour walking through the shelter. Theodore met the cats, including a grumpy orange tabby named Marmalade who surprisingly let Theodore pet him. He met the volunteers, including young Tommy, who was indeed reading to a group of cats in the quiet room, and Marcus, the veteran who was training one of the newer dogs. "You've built something special here," Theodore said as they stood in Fiona's office, looking at the photo wall. "This is more than just a shelter. It's a community," Fiona agreed. "That's why losing it would have been so devastating." Theodore turned to face her, and the space between them suddenly felt charged. "I'm glad I could help. Would you like to stay for lunch?" "It's nothing fancy, just sandwiches, but some of the volunteers usually eat together on Saturdays." "I'd like that." Lunch was chaotic in the best way. They crowded into the small break room, volunteers and staff sharing food and stories. Theodore was quiet at first, clearly out of his element, but Fiona noticed him relaxing as people asked him genuine questions about his life and his dog Duke. He even told a story about how Duke had once stolen an entire Thanksgiving turkey off the counter, which had everyone laughing. As the afternoon wore on, Fiona found excuses to stay near Theodore. She showed him the new roof, the updated medical area, the plans she had for expanding the outdoor space. He listened intently, asked smart questions, and even offered suggestions from his experience in development and construction. "You could apply for a specific grant I know about," he said as they walked back to his SUV. "It's for nonprofit organizations that serve rural communities. I sit on the board. I could make sure your application gets seen." "You've already done so much," Fiona said. "I don't want to take advantage." "You're not," Theodore said firmly. "You're doing important work and you deserve support. Let me help." There was something in his tone, an earnestness that went beyond professional courtesy. Fiona looked up at him and their eyes met. The moment stretched and she wondered if he felt it too, this pull between them. "Thank you," she finally said, "for coming today, for everything. Can I come back?" The question seemed to surprise him as much as it did her. "I mean to volunteer, if you need help." Fiona's heart soared. "We always need help, especially with the dogs. They need exercise and training. Then I'll come back next Saturday if that works." "It works." Theodore did come back the next Saturday, and the Saturday after that. Within a month, he was a regular fixture at the shelter, showing up every weekend in jeans and work boots, ready to help with whatever was needed. He repaired fences, installed new kennel gates, and spent hours working with Scout, who had become his shadow. The other volunteers loved him. Marcus appreciated having another guy around who could handle the heavier work. Tommy looked up to Theodore, following him around and asking questions about business and success. Mrs. Patterson baked extra cookies on the days Theodore was there, and Fiona found herself falling for him a little more each week. It was not just that he was handsome, though he certainly was. It was the way he was gentle with the animals, patient with the nervous ones, playful with the energetic ones. It was how he listened when people talked, really listened, giving them his full attention. It was the way he rolled up his sleeves and did the dirty work without complaint, mucking out kennels and bathing muddy dogs. It was also the small things. How he always brought coffee for Fiona on Saturday mornings, remembering that she liked it with cream and 1 sugar. How he fixed the ancient coffee maker in the break room when it finally gave up. How he stayed late one evening to help her write grant applications, his business expertise proving invaluable. 2 months after his first visit, Fiona and Theodore were sitting on the back steps of the shelter, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Scout was lying at Theodore's feet, exhausted from a day of play. "I've been thinking about adopting him," Theodore said, reaching down to pet Scout's head. "I have the space and he needs a home." Fiona felt a pang of sadness at the thought of Scout leaving, but it was overshadowed by happiness. "He loves you. You'd be perfect for each other." "Would you help me with the adoption process? I know it's your policy, but I want to do it right." "Of course." They sat in comfortable silence for a while before Theodore spoke again. "I've been coming here for 2 months now. I know. We've all gotten used to having you around. I need to tell you something." He turned to face her, his expression serious. "I didn't just start coming here because of the shelter or the animals. I came back because of you." Fiona's breath caught. "Theodore, let me finish," he said gently. "That first day you walked into my office building, you were so fierce, so determined. You could have sent a thank you note, but you drove 2 hours to look me in the eye and make sure I understood what my donation meant. That took courage. And then I came here and saw what you've built, how you care for these animals and these people, and I couldn't stop thinking about you." "I've been thinking about you too," Fiona admitted, her heart pounding. "Every day." I keep telling myself it's crazy that we're too different, but I can't help it. We're not that different, Theodore said, reaching for her hand. His palm was warm and calloused from work, and Fiona's fingers intertwined with his naturally. We both care about things that matter. We both work hard. We both believe in second chances. You're a billionaire CEO and I run an animal shelter. I think we're pretty different. Does that matter to you, the money? No, Fiona said honestly. That's not what I care about. I care that you're kind and smart, and you showed up here every Saturday for 2 months just to spend time around me. I care that you fixed our coffee maker and taught Tommy how to build a business plan and helped Marcus through a panic attack last week when you thought no one was watching. Theodore's eyes widened slightly. You saw that. I see everything that happens here. It's my job. He laughed softly, then grew serious again. Fiona, I want to take you to dinner. A real date, just you and me. I'd like that. Their first date was the following Friday. Theodore picked her up from her small apartment above the shelter, and Fiona had spent 2 hours trying to figure out what to wear. She had finally settled on a simple green dress that brought out her eyes and the only pair of heels she owned that were not scuffed. Theodore's expression when she opened the door made all the effort worthwhile. You look beautiful, he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her blush. He took her to a restaurant overlooking the water, the kind of place where Fiona would never normally be able to afford to eat. But Theodore made her feel comfortable, deflecting the pretentious waiter with easy humor and focusing entirely on her. They talked for hours. Theodore told her about growing up in Boston, the youngest of 3 children. His father had built Nash Global Industries from nothing, and the pressure to succeed had been immense. His older brother worked in finance, his sister was a doctor, and Theodore had been expected to take over the company. Did you want to? Fiona asked. Yes and no, Theodore said. I love the work, the strategy and problem solving, but sometimes I wonder if I chose it or if it was just expected of me. Being at the shelter these past months, doing physical work and seeing immediate results, it's been refreshing. Fiona shared her own story. She had grown up in Meadowbrook, the daughter of a teacher and a carpenter. She had gone to community college for business administration and had worked at a corporate office for 3 years before burning out completely. I was miserable, she said. Every day felt meaningless. Then the old shelter director retired and I applied on a whim. I had no experience with animals beyond the family dog, but I knew how to manage budgets and organize people. I figured I could learn the rest. And you did. I did. It's been the hardest and most rewarding thing I've ever done. There are days when I want to quit, when another animal dies, or we lose funding, or someone abandons a box of puppies on our doorstep in the middle of winter. But then I see an adoption go through, or a volunteer's face light up, or an animal who was terrified start to trust again, and I remember why it matters. Theodore reached across the table and took her hand. You're remarkable, Fiona Carter. She squeezed his fingers. You're not so bad yourself, Theodore Nash. After that night, they fell into a rhythm. Theodore would come to the shelter on weekends, and they would have dinner together during the week when his schedule allowed. He introduced her to his world slowly, taking her to a charity gala where she met business leaders and socialites who looked at her like she did not belong. But Theodore stayed by her side, his hand on the small of her back, clearly proud to be with her. Fiona introduced Theodore to her parents, who were cautiously welcoming. Her father took Theodore aside for a conversation that Fiona was not privy to, and when they emerged, her father was smiling and Theodore looked slightly pale but pleased. What did he say to you? Fiona asked later. Just that if I hurt you, he knows how to make a body disappear, Theodore said with a grin. I like your father. 4 months into their relationship, Theodore officially adopted Scout. The paperwork was simple, but the moment Theodore signed the forms and Scout became officially his, Fiona saw tears in his eyes. "He's going to have a good life with you," she said, hugging Theodore tightly. "Come with me," Theodore said suddenly. "To my house. I want you to see where Scout will live, where I live." Fiona had been to Theodore's penthouse apartment in the city once, a sleek modern space with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art. But he drove her out of the city that day, into the hills, until they reached a property that took her breath away. The house was large but not ostentatious, built of stone and wood that blended into the landscape. It sat on 20 acres of forested land with trails and a pond. Scout immediately took off running, barking with joy. "This is where you live?" Fiona asked, amazed. "I bought it 2 years ago but barely spent time here because of work. I've been coming out here more lately, thinking about what I want my life to look like." He showed her around the house. It was beautiful inside, with high ceilings and large windows that brought the outside in. The kitchen was huge, the bedrooms comfortable, but it was clearly a house that needed life breathed into it. "It's wonderful," Fiona said as they stood on the back deck, watching Scout explore. "Scout is going to love it here." "I hope you'll love it too," Theodore said quietly. "I know it's fast and we've only been together a few months, but Fiona, I'm in love with you. I think I have been since that first day in my office when you refused to be intimidated. I want you in my life, really in it. I want mornings with you and evenings together. I want to build something that matters." Fiona turned to face him, her eyes stinging with happy tears. "I love you too. I've been afraid to say it because it feels too big too fast, but I do." Theodore pulled her close and kissed her, and Fiona melted into him. The kiss was deep and tender, full of promise. "Move in with me," Theodore said when they finally broke apart. "I know the shelter is important and I would never ask you to give it up, but we could make this work. I'll drive you to Meadowbrook every morning and pick you up every evening, or you can take one of the cars, whatever you need." "That's a 40-minute drive each way," Fiona protested weakly. "I don't care. I want to wake up next to you." Fiona thought about her tiny apartment above the shelter, about how lonely it got at night. She thought about this beautiful house and the man who had become the center of her world. "Okay," she said. "Yes." The transition was easier than Fiona expected. Theodore had been right about the commute not mattering. They fell into a routine where he would drop her at the shelter in the morning on his way to the office, and she would either drive herself home in the evening or he would pick her up. The house transformed with her presence. She added warmth with throw pillows and photographs, plants on the windowsills and herbs in the kitchen. Scout thrived in his new home, and Fiona and Theodore would spend evenings walking the trails with him, talking about their days. Theodore started working from home more often, setting up an office in one of the spare bedrooms so he could be close to Fiona. 6 months after moving in together, Theodore surprised Fiona with news that made her cry. "I've established a foundation," he said one evening over dinner. "The Nash Foundation for Animal Welfare. We're seeding it with $5 million, and the first recipient is going to be Meadowbrook Animal Shelter. We're funding a full expansion, including a new veterinary clinic, additional kennels, and a community education center." Fiona stared at him, unable to speak. "Theodore, that's too much." "It's not enough," he said firmly. "I've watched what you do, how hard you work with limited resources. This foundation will support shelters across the country, but Meadowbrook is special. It's where I found you. It's where I remembered what it feels like to do something that matters beyond profit margins. I don't know what to say. Say you'll help me run it. Not full-time. I know you need to stay at the shelter, but as an advisor. Your experience and passion are what we need." Yes, Fiona said, laughing through her tears. Yes, of course. The expansion of the shelter took 8 months. Theodore brought in his best contractors, and they worked closely with Fiona to design something that was functional and beautiful. The new veterinary clinic had state-of-the-art equipment. The kennels were spacious and comfortable. The community center had rooms for classes and events. The grand opening was a huge event. The mayor came, along with news crews and community members. Theodore stood beside Fiona as she cut the ribbon, Scout sitting obediently between them. None of this would have been possible without Theodore Nash, Fiona said in her speech. He saw potential in our little shelter and gave us a chance, but more than that, he gave his time and his heart. He showed up every Saturday and did the work alongside us. He became part of our family. Theodore squeezed her hand, and Fiona saw the emotion in his eyes. That night, after all the visitors had left and they were back at home, Theodore led Fiona out to the deck. The stars were brilliant overhead, and Scout was asleep inside by the fireplace. "Fiona Carter," Theodore said, getting down on one knee. "You walked into my office building 18 months ago and changed my entire life. You showed me what real passion looks like, what it means to care about something beyond yourself. You made me want to be a better man. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love another person, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Will you marry me?" The ring was beautiful, a simple diamond that caught the starlight, but Fiona barely saw it through her tears. "Yes," she said, pulling him up and kissing him. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 6 months later in a ceremony at the shelter. It was Fiona's idea, and Theodore had loved it immediately. They set up chairs in the newly expanded outdoor area, decorated with flowers and lights. Scout was the ring bearer, wearing a bow tie and carrying the rings in a pouch attached to his collar. All the volunteers were there, along with Theodore's family and Fiona's parents. Marcus walked Fiona down the aisle, and Tommy did a reading. Mrs. Patterson made the cake. As Fiona and Theodore exchanged vows, promising to love and support each other through whatever came, Fiona thought about how strange and wonderful life could be. A desperate donation, a bold decision to show up at an office building, and everything had changed. "I love you," Theodore whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. "I love you too," Fiona whispered back, and they sealed their promises with a kiss while everyone cheered and Scout barked happily. 3 years into their marriage, Fiona discovered she was pregnant. She told Theodore on a Saturday morning at the shelter, handing him a small wrapped box while they were supposedly organizing supplies in the storage room. "What's this?" he asked, confused since it was not his birthday or any special occasion. "Open it." Inside was a tiny onesie that said "Future Shelter Volunteer" on it. Theodore stared at it for a long moment before the realization hit. "Are you serious?" His voice cracked with emotion. "Very serious. We're having a baby." Theodore pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "We're having a baby," he repeated, wonder in his voice. "Fiona, we're going to be parents." The pregnancy was smooth, and Theodore was incredibly attentive, constantly worrying about whether Fiona was doing too much at the shelter. She finally had to sit him down and explain that she was pregnant, not fragile, and that she needed to keep working. "I just want you and the baby to be safe," he said. "We are safe, and our daughter needs to know from the beginning that her mother is strong and capable." "Daughter?" Theodore's eyes widened. "We're having a girl," Fiona smiled. "I found out at the appointment yesterday. I wanted to tell you in person rather than over the phone." Theodore was quiet for a moment, then smiled so widely it transformed his whole face. "A daughter. We're having a daughter." They named her Claire after Fiona's grandmother. Claire Nash came into the world on a sunny spring morning, weighing 7 pounds and 6 ounces, with dark hair like her father and her mother's green eyes. Theodore cried when he held her for the first time, overwhelmed by the love he felt for this tiny person. Fiona watched her husband cradle their daughter and felt her heart overflow. "She's perfect," she whispered. "She's ours," Theodore said, looking up at Fiona with so much love it took her breath away. "Thank you for her, for everything." Claire grew up surrounded by love and animals. The shelter remained a central part of their lives, with Fiona continuing to run it and Theodore serving on the board while expanding the foundation to support shelters nationwide. Scout, now getting older, was gentle with Claire, letting her toddle after him and curl up against him for naps. When Claire was 2, Fiona and Theodore decided to expand their family again. This time, they had a son they named Daniel. He was born with Theodore's dark eyes and Fiona's stubborn streak, and he adored his big sister from the moment he could focus his eyes. Life was full and chaotic in the best way. Mornings were a rush of getting kids fed and ready, of Scout needing his walk, of coffee consumed while juggling schedules. Evenings were family dinners and bath time, of stories read and songs sung. Weekends often included time at the shelter, where Claire and Daniel were learning to be gentle with animals and understand the importance of caring for those who needed help. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Theodore and Fiona stood on the deck of their home, watching their children play in the yard with Scout and the 2 other dogs they had adopted over the years. The shelter was thriving, having helped thousands of animals find homes. The foundation had expanded to support over 200 shelters across the country. "You remember that day you showed up at my office?" Theodore asked, pulling Fiona close. "How could I forget? I was terrified." "You didn't seem terrified. You seemed fierce and determined." "I was shaking inside," Fiona admitted. "But I had to thank you. I had to see the person who had saved us." "I'm so glad you did," Theodore said, kissing her forehead. "You saved me right back, you know. I was going through the motions of life, building wealth and success, but not really living. You reminded me what matters." "We reminded each other," Fiona said, leaning into his warmth. "I was so focused on survival that I had forgotten about actually living too, about letting someone in." Claire came running up to the deck, Daniel toddling behind her. "Mommy, Daddy, Scout found a turtle." "Can we keep it?" Fiona and Theodore looked at each other and laughed. "Let's go see this turtle," Fiona said, taking Claire's hand while Theodore scooped up Daniel. They walked across the yard together, a family built on love and second chances, on a donation that became a meeting, on courage and kindness. Scout barked excitedly, showing off his discovery, and Claire was already naming the turtle, deciding where it should live in their pond. Theodore caught Fiona's eye and smiled, that private smile that was just for her. She smiled back, knowing that every day with him was a gift. Their life together had not always been easy. They had faced challenges and disagreements, late nights and difficult decisions. But they had faced them together, and that had made all the difference. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, the Nash family headed back to the house. Inside, there would be dinner to make and bedtime routines to follow, homework to check and plans to make. There would be shelter business to discuss and foundation decisions to consider, children to nurture and a marriage to tend. But in that moment, walking across their land with the people and animals they loved, Fiona felt completely content. She had built something meaningful with her life, had found love in the most unexpected way, and had created a family that was full of joy and purpose. Theodore's hand found hers, their fingers interlocking in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. 10 years together, and she still felt that spark, that connection that had begun the moment she walked into his office building with determination and hope. "I love you," she said quietly. "I love you too," Theodore replied. "Always." The house welcomed them with warmth and light, Scout trotting inside first with the kids racing after him. Theodore and Fiona paused at the door, taking one last look at the evening sky before following their children inside. Their love story had started with a donation and a bold choice to say thank you in person. It had grown through weekends spent together, through shared purpose and genuine connection. It had deepened through challenges overcome and dreams realized. And it continued every single day, in the small moments and the big ones, in laughter shared and tears comforted, in a life built together with intention and love. Years from now, when Claire and Daniel were grown with their own stories to tell, they would remember growing up surrounded by rescued animals and parents who loved each other deeply. They would remember a home filled with warmth and a family built on the foundation of kindness. And Theodore and Fiona would look back on the twists and turns that brought them together, grateful for every moment, every choice, every chance they took on love. The billionaire who learned to see beyond profit margins and the shelter director who dared to knock on his door. Two people from different worlds who found their way to each other and built something beautiful. Their happily ever after was not perfect or without struggle, but it was real and it was theirs. A love story that began with gratitude and grew into a lifetime of partnership, passion, and purpose. In the end, that was all that mattered. The family they had created, the love they shared, and the life they continued to build together, one day at a time, forever grateful for the moment their paths crossed and everything changed.